Hi guys, James at RampantLionReviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one, we are going to head over to Germany once again for the first time in what feels like a good little while. Now, the review that we're going to do today I think should be quite interesting. This beer is actually quite a well-known German beer, but it's one of these ones that I've just never gotten around to reviewing. And in truth, this particular beer style is one that I've wanted to cover on the channel a little bit more in depth for quite some time. So this review is long overdue, and I have to say I'm going to enjoy this over the next couple of videos because we do have a few examples of this style to review, and I always enjoy this, you know, just getting more familiar with a style of beer that I'm not overly familiar with. So hopefully you guys enjoy these videos as well, and this is a very good example to start this kind of mini series of reviews that we're going to do, if we can call it that. So hopefully this is another good beer, hopefully it makes for an interesting review, and as always I hope that you guys enjoy my take on this one as well. So yeah, for this review then, we are going to head to Cologne, however you want to say it, and we're going to have a look at my first beer from Privatbrauerei Gaffel Becker. So this one is the famous Gaffel Kölsch. It comes in at 4.8% ABV, and I think you know what style this one is. A nice Kölsch beer. So yeah, this one is one that I bought through Beers of Europe, and they've got a very good selection of German stuff actually, and you will see more Kölsch reviews appearing on the channel over the next little while, and you're also going to see some Alt beers and some Dortmunder Helles beers as well. These are styles that I've been meaning to cover for quite a little bit, but it was only recently that I found that Beers of Europe had lots of different examples of these, because they always seem to be in and out of stock and things. So I took the opportunity and I got a hold of some of them. But yeah, the only other Kölsch I can think of that I've reviewed on the channel that's quite a famous one would be the Flu Kölsch, and that was a good couple of years ago actually. So as I say, these Kölsch reviews are long overdue, and it's quite interesting because, you know, there's a bit of a rivalry between you know, Dortmund, Köln and Dusseldorf about drinking all these different kinds of beers. But yeah, I just like German beer in general, we should say. But yeah, looking forward to trying this one at the Gaffel Kölsch at 4.8% ABV. So as always with my reviews then, I'll tell you a little bit about the brewery before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting, just fast forward. All the usual links are in the video description below. That's the brewery website, the link to my other reviews that hopefully I can do in the future from Privatbrauerei Gaffel Becker. This is the very first time I'm trying one of their beers, as I mentioned, but there's all the usual social media down there. If you want to see more reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. The whole channel, of course, has a geography-based tagging system, so you can go into the homepage and search for beer based on country, city, state, county, province, prefecture, whatever it is you happen to be interested in. Do check out the playlist of beers from different countries. There is one there for all the German beers that I've reviewed for you. That's being added to whenever I get the opportunity. And as always, please do get in touch and let me know some of the other beers and breweries that you guys would like to see me review. It's always great to hear from you guys that are watching the videos, and the support that you show the channel is hugely appreciated. So let's go on to the history of the brewery then, and I will apologise in advance for any bad German pronunciations. I can speak German fairly well, I can pronounce it quite well, but you know, when you're doing these things spontaneously, things are bound to go wrong. But anyway, on to our history section then. So, the name Gaffel Kölsch is taken from the Gaffels, who were the political arm of the merchants and guilds in Köln, and they originate back to the year 1396 when there were 22 Gaffels who ran the city council. But these guys also held positions such as mayor of the city, they worked as judges, and you know, they were public servants basically. These were the guys who were running Köln at that point in time. But what they would do is they would round off their meetings in the evening with food and drink, often at the Altamarkt in the city, and the building in which they did this was known as the Gaffel House, and it's first documented in the year 1213, but the building has existed in its current form since 1507 apparently. But a Gaffel was the Kölsch term for the two-pronged fork that the Gaffels had brought back from Venice during the 11th century. So yeah, quite an interesting wee bit of history there. So that's where the word Gaffel comes from. But the site of the current Gaffel brewery is on Eigelstein 41 to 43, so 41 so 43, if I'm remembering my numbers correctly. But the first brewery documented on this site was the Brauerei und Gaststätte zum Leichten, which was run officially as Braueria Supra Monticulum, which is in English the brewery above the hill. But the current company though traces its roots back to 18 1922 when a brewery called Zum Brüsseler Hof was opened by Gottfried Josef Schumacher, who ran the brewery until his death in 1857, and then his siblings continued to run it until the year 1859. At this point, they sold the brewery to Reinhard Josef Appel, and he ran it until 1874, and his widow continued to run it until 1888, but only as a restaurant. So the brewer Adam Lenzen temporarily ran a brewery in this premises, which operated along with the restaurant under the name Privatbrauerei AG. So basically, AG is like a German business term, you know, corporation, or there's GmbH today as well as the other one. But yeah, business term. But if you fast forward a little bit to May of 1908, the Becker brothers took over the business and renovated the brewery and guest house, and they changed the name of the Kölner Gaffel to Inda Gaffel, and they renovated the buildings again in 1918 with historical motifs from over the city of Köln. But just prior to the Second World War, they produced around 5,000 hectolitres of beer, but by the end of the 1940s, production had reached 10,000 hectolitres, at which time it was being run by the fourth generation of the Becker family. But from 1972, the brewery was run by the brothers Peter, Heinrich and Johannes, and then in 1986, they signed the Kölsch Convention, if that's the right German pronunciation, Kölsch Convention, the Kölsch Convention in English, which regulates what breweries can officially produce Kölsch. But the brothers remained in control of the brewery until 2006, at which point there was a dispute between Heinrich and Johannes, which resulted in Heinrich's son, Heinrich Philipp, taking over the operational control of the company, and then this was confirmed by the courts in 2013. From what I understand, it was actually a little bit of a kind of messy affair, that. But at this point, in 2013, the brewery was producing around 480,000 hectolitres of beer per year, and the beer is apparently bottled in 2 different locations. This is at Privatbrauerei Bolten in Korschenbroich, and also Brauerei Königshof in Krefeld, which is those are quite close to Köln, of course. But that is all I can tell you about the history of Gaffel Kölsch. Quite an old brewery, actually. But not as old as some of the ones that you're going to find in Germany. But these guys, as I say, are one of the most recognisable Kölsch beer brands that you'll find in the city. But yeah, that is all I can tell you about them. As I say, if you want to learn more about this brewery and the Gaffel name, if we can call it that, you can check out the brewery website. You can follow them on Facebook and Instagram to keep up to date with all the latest goings on. And you can check out the Rate Beer, Untappd and Beer Advocate pages to learn a little bit more about all the different beers that these guys have done. So yeah, that's it for your history section. Let's get on and actually have a taste of this beer itself. So I'll just let you have a little look at the artwork on this one before we open it up. There you can see the Gaffel Kölsch label, and I'm guessing that this guy in here is one of the old Gaffels who used to run the city of Köln back in the 14th century. But yeah, quite nice, I have to say. You'll also see that this one has the European Union geographical protection symbol on it, which is cool. Of course, Kölsch beer has to be produced in the area surrounding Köln, which is interesting because when I've been in Japan, there are many breweries over there who brew Kölsch beer, Kölsch style beer, I guess we should call it. But yeah, there you can see the little top label on this one, and again, that has the Gaffel on it. But I did notice this beer actually has a slightly different bottle cap, so they must have been doing special editions of these. But it was quite interesting that I got the Copenhagen one, because I live very close to Copenhagen normally. But yeah, this is a half-litre bottle. I actually don't know what I paid for this through Beers of Europe, but I can guarantee you it will be more expensive than it would be in Germany. You'll get this bottle for about €1 in Germany, I'm sure. But yeah, as we said earlier, this one is the Gaffel Kölsch, 4.8% ABV. Let's get it out and we'll get on with the tasting then. I'm very, very curious to see what this is going to have in store for us. Now, 2 things I'll point out before I taste this beer. Normally, a Kölsch glass is quite a tall, it's basically a tall, straight glass. Unfortunately, I do not have a glass that is like that. I don't have a Kölsch glass, unfortunately. So I went with my regular tulip because, you know, the tulip glass is the best all-rounder for different styles, in my opinion. That's why I use it in pretty much all of my reviews, apart from some of the German lagers where I will use the Steins. But yeah, I should also point out too that the Kölsch beer is not a lager. This is a top fermented beer, so therefore it's an ale. So yeah, the main difference, of course, a lager is a bottom fermented beer. The fermentation takes place at cooler temperatures, usually about 8 to 12 degrees, whereas ales, the fermentation takes place at a higher temperature, usually about 15 to 16 degrees Celsius. But yeah, that's about 75% of the bottle poured out and into the glass, so we can take a look at this one properly. And as I say, I've not tried all that many Kölsch beers, only Through Kölsch is the one that springs to mind, but I've had a few Kölsch type beers from other breweries anyway. But yeah, this looks pretty interesting. So before the head disappears on this one, this beer's poured with about a 2/3 finger of a frothy, I would say perfect white head. It doesn't even have a little bit of creaminess to it, and you can see there are some very, very small bubbles to this one. There's 1 or 2 bigger bubbles sitting there, and a few bigger ones just sitting, sitting between the beer and the head itself, but it does look very nice, and that is, as I say, a perfect white head. You can also see that this beer is pretty much crystal clear. There's just a bit of condensation on the glass, and colour-wise, I would describe this one as being a nice kind of pale golden straw. If I put my hand behind the glass, there you can see that nice natural colour of the beer. Now remember, the colour of your beer depends on 1, the type of malts that you use. This goes a long way to determining the EBC rating of the beer. 2, the length of the wort boil is also going to play a role, because the longer you boil the wort, the more the sugars caramelise, and thus you get a darker colour of beer. Any barrel aging that you do or any adjuncts that you put in the beer will also affect that, but when it comes to Kölsch, it is of course brewed under the regulations of the Reinheitsgebot, the German purity law, originally Bavarian purity law of 1516. So only hops, malt, yeast and water in the beer essentially. But yeah, this one does look pretty nice, I have to say. It looks, it kind of looks quite similar to a Helles when I think about it, to be honest. But yeah, that's all we need to say about the appearance of this one. Let's take a closer look at the aroma and just see how we go. Smells pretty nice, I have to say. Yeah, to me it actually smells like quite a, if I'm comparing it to the other styles that I am very familiar with from Germany, it actually smells like quite a nice bready Helles beer. It's got a good little bit of biscuity sweetness to it as well, which is kind of interesting. So yeah, that's what first strikes me about this one. So it's got a nice bit of a bready backbone to it, definitely a little bit of biscuity sweetness. The green component really leans towards the grassy side of things, and on the fruity side of things, it's kind of as you'd expect. It's a little bit of that kind of dry apricot-y, kind of peary sort of thing that you get out of this one a little bit. Just very, very mild fruity characteristics, but mainly grassy. So yeah, aroma-wise, it's quite nice. Let's break that aroma down for you a little bit more and just describe it a wee bit more in depth though. So yeah, aroma wise, for me, the malty backbone of this beer, as we say, is lovely. It's just lovely light. It's got a lovely lightness to it, but at the same time you get this typical fresh German bready sort of thing to it. So yeah, there's a little bit of bread crust under there, but this lovely big fresh fluffy white bread. But at the same time you can kind of smell from this beer that the bread has somewhat of a density to it. You can smell that it's actually quite a dense white bread, but that's one of the things I miss about living in Germany. I used to love going to the bakery at the weekend and getting some nice pretzels and some bread to last me the week. I always enjoyed that. But yeah, this has got a lovely, very fresh, fluffy, but slightly more dense white bready character to it. A little bit of bread crust underneath, but on top of that, there is a good sweetness to this beer. I'll just say that. So yeah, for me, it's actually very straightforward, this one, in terms of its malty aroma. You've got the bread crust, the white bread, but on top of that, you've got this kind of McVitie's digestive biscuity sort of thing. There's maybe perhaps a wee bit of a kind of crackery element to this one as well, like a Jacob's cream cracker, or like a Took cracker or something like that. But yeah, definitely a wee bit of a McVitie's digestive biscuity type sweetness on this one for me. I really like this, actually. Does it say? It says something. It just says hop extract is in this beer, so yeah, cool. But yeah, for me, the malty side of this one, it smells really clean and crisp. The more that you smell of it, the more kind of crisp and fresh the bread actually starts to smell, in my opinion. But yeah, I like this beer. I do like the aroma of this one. It gets a thumbs up from me for the malty side of things. Again, with the hoppy side of this beer, it is kind of what you would expect. There's a little bit of earthiness to this one. You get that lovely smooth German noble earthiness. I'm guessing with where this beer is from, I think it's most likely to use Tettnang hops. Tettnanger hops come from the Baden-Württemberg region. Whereas the Hallertaus, of course, come from Bavaria, Bayern. So yeah, I think it's more likely that they're using the Tettnang hops in this one. But regardless, German hops for me always have a nice bright grassiness to them, and they've always got an element of smoothness. So you can smell that sort of smooth, soft, earthy character to this beer, but it's very light. I'll point that out as well. There's a little touch of herbal note in there, and you've also got that bright floral aromaticity, but a lot of grassiness for me. The whole green component of this beer really leans toward that grassy end of the spectrum, and there's a little touch of a grassy zestiness in there too. But I get a wee bit of earth, a wee bit of oily character, should I say, from the grassy notes in this beer. Fruity side of things is kind of just as I said earlier. You get this little touch of a kind of dried apricot-y note. Yeah, there's a little touch of dried apricot for me, a little bit of a kind of peary character, and yeah, just a wee bit of that typical kind of sort of slightly grassy, fruity vibe to this beer. So yeah, aroma wise, this is quite nice to me. I'm surprised at how kind of sweet this one smells. The more and more that I smell this beer, the more sweetness you get from the bread, from the biscuit, and also the fruity character as well. So yeah, I really like how this beer goes about its business from the aroma side of things. As I always say, take a wee bit of time to enjoy the aroma of these beers before you get stuck into them. But yeah, let's have a taste of this one then. So this is the famous Gaffel Kölsch, coming in at 4.8% ABV from Privatbrauerei Gaffel Becker in Cologne, Köln in Germany. Let's get stuck into this one. Slange, Skål, cheers, Prost. That's pretty damn solid, I have to say. That's nice. So, as I've said to you before, when it comes to German traditional beer, my favourite styles, of course, I love a good Helles beer, but you know, the Dunkels and the Doppelbocks, I love those, the Rauch beers as well. For me, if I think the style that you know you're going to compare this one to, I think would be the Helles, and of course you do have the Munich Helles, which is the more bready one, and you've got the Dortmunder Helles, which is the more kind of hoppy one. Like I say, there's a regional rivalry in here, so you've got to be careful what you say. But yeah, for me, if I'm comparing this beer to the other styles, and as I say, I'm not madly familiar with Kölsch beers, but I would say that this one comes across, it's almost got a little touch of the crispness you would expect from a Pilsner. It's got the breadiness that you would want from a Helles beer, but it feels more oily, if that makes sense. It really feels like a more oily beer, this one. And of course it's going to do that because this is an ale rather than a lager. So yeah, it's definitely interesting for this one. For me, it's like quite an oily, sweet Helles type beer, this one. But we need to be careful again with that, because Helles in German really just means like light. It means like it's kind of light coloured beer. So yeah, this is nice. I do remember the Frühkölsch being very, very smooth, because that's what you'll notice with this beer. It's kind of oily, but it's very smooth and clean at the same time. So yeah, I think it would be very interesting to go to Köln and actually try some of these beers in the Brauhouses and things. So that's maybe a wee out and about expedition that I'll do at some point in the future. I'll go to Köln, Dusseldorf and Dortmund and actually try these beers in the various brewery restaurants and things. But this is very nice, so I'm going to say Gaffel Kölsch gets a thumbs up from me on its first impression. But let's break this beer down and analyse it a wee bit more, as we always do. Yeah, it's quite, I find this one it's quite a sweet, bready, and just very slightly oily and clean beer, this one. I like it for sure. I think I'm going to enjoy reviewing more of these Kölsch beers over the next wee while. But yeah, anyway, let's break this beer down and describe it as we always do. Middle third of the palate then. So, backbone of the beer. You can feel there is a little bit of a fresh sort of white bread crust in there. So you can feel that just forms the backbone of the beer. as you go toward the kind of front of that middle third of your palate, you get a little touch of like a crackery note out of this one, just a little bit of woody character, absolutely. Yeah, you've got a really nice little bit of kind of crackery character in there, just a little bit of woodiness. But yeah, the backbone of this beer is absolutely that very fresh white bread crusty note there. On top of that, you get this kind of dense but still quite soft and fluffy white bready character. And that's the mainstay of the beer. What you'll notice with this one is that the further you go into the aftertaste with it, that white bready character lingers there. It gets a bit sweeter at the same time. We'll come to the sweetness in a minute, but you can feel that the bready character just gets ever so slightly drier the more that you drink of this beer. So I do like that about this one, I have to say. Yeah, it's kind of the other thing you notice about it is that it just gets more and more oily. The aftertaste and the sweetness just gets more and more oily in this beer. But yeah, bread crust with a few crackery, woody elements, and then a dense but still fluffy white bready character in there. That goes together really nicely. On top of that bready layer though, there's a nice kind of circle in the middle of your palate, and it feels like this sort of oily McVitie's digestive biscuity sort of thing there. So in the dead centre of the palate, you do get just a little hint. It almost does feel like a straight up caramel in this one. And again, I think that's because this beer is an ale rather than a lager. So in the dead centre of your palate, you do get this straight up caramelly note, and that's the booziness of the beer. But as you go further and further out from this one, you get maybe a little hint of a slightly kind of toffee-ish note. But then as you reach the extremities of that middle third of your palate, it's distinctly more it's distinctly more kind of bread, like a kind of McVitie's digestive biscuity sort of thing. That's really what I get out of this one. But as I say, this brown sugary element to this beer really has a very oily nature to it. And that's what I like about this. This is kind of interesting. It really is. It's very much like a less bitter Pilsner, but at the same time, it's like a Pilsner, but less bitter, thicker, and just more oily. That's kind of that's my impression of this particular Kölsch. But we'll see in the next videos whether this is typical of what we get, because you can find lots of different nuances. We found this when we had a look at the Vienna lagers. They all had little niches and nuances and things like that. So we'll see it with the other ones. But I like this beer. I do like this. I think this would be lovely to try on tap, actually. So, yeah, flavour-wise, this is just really nice. I don't think there's anything else we really need to say about the middle third of your palate in this beer. So let's focus on the back third of your palate. Border region between middle third and back third of your palate. You get a little bit of a bready build up there. You get the impression of a kind of more wholemeal brown bready sort of thing. And then into the back third of the palate, you can feel the base of your tongue is more, you do get more of a kind of dry, bread crusty note out of this one, absolutely. So you can feel that nice dry bread crusty character in there. As always say, more bitter and dry flavours come out further toward the back of the palate. The sweeter flavours come out further forward on your tongue. So again, that's really nice with this beer. But on top of that, you get you do get more, I get more of a kind of wholemeal brown bread this time. You've got a taller, fluffy bready layer, and it feels a little bit more wholemeal and bready. Then on top of that, there's a nice big there's a nice big kind of white bready layer with this. You get that nice fluffy white bread sitting on top. So the back third of the palate is distinctly different, I think, from the middle third of your palate. But on top of all of that, you've got more of a yeasty note to this one. And to me, the yeasty side of this beer feels like a more dense, doughy, brown bready character. And then again, you get this nice kind of, you get a nice kind of bread crusty. You do get a little bit more of a kind of grainy bread crusty character just around the edge of this one. So yeah, the way that that goes together, I think, is again very, very nice. Yeah, other than that, I don't think we need to say much more about the back third of the palate, but certainly the flavour on the back third of the palate is taller than the middle third of your palate. So you can see as you go further, it starts up, it certainly, you can feel the flavour is taller. Then as you go into the middle third of the palate, it just squashes down a wee bit more. So yeah, the way that goes together, I think, is very nice. Malty side of things gets my seal of approval. So hoppy side of the beer then. Back corners of the palate, it is kind of what you'd expect. Lovely, smooth, very light German noble earthiness there. And as you move further forward, you get a teeny bit of herbal character out of it, but the earthiness, I think, is smooth and almost slightly sweet. But yeah, as you push toward the kind of front corners of the palate, you get a little bit of a, you do get a little bit of kind of floral aromaticity out of this one, but this beer isn't too bitter, of course. But round the front curve of the palate, the beer for me is definitely lighter and more grassy. But the green component for me has a little bit of an oily character for sure. Yeah, I really like that about this one. So the green component for me, you've just got that nice little bit of floral note there, and it feels quite fresh. It's not too spicy or anything like that, but around the front curve of the palate, you've got a bit of a wet but still fresh grassy character coming out of this one. So a big thumbs up from me, absolutely. So yeah, flavour wise, this beer, I think, just yeah, it just goes together really nicely on the hoppy side of things. You've got a lovely you've got a little bit of crispness coming out of the hops there, which works quite well. But I think that's everything we need to say about the green component in this one. Let's focus on the front third of the palate and the fruity character of the beer. So the border region between front third and middle third of your palate, again, you get a little bit of a bready build up there. It's a little bit like a kind of brown bread, fresh kind of wholemeal bread. The base of the front third of your palate, I think, is a wee bit more white bready though. And on top of that, you get that nice oily bubble where the juicy fruity esters just roll their way out of the beer. And this one is kind of what you'd expect if you know these noble hops quite well. So yeah, toward the back of that front third of your palate, you've got a lovely wee touch of you've got a little bit of that sort of dry apricot-y character to it. So yeah, lovely little bit, as I say, lovely little bit of a kind of dry apricot-y sort of thing there. But then sitting on top of the drier apricot, you've got this big oily peary character, and that spreads forward toward the front half of the middle third of your, the front half of that front third of your palate. And then, you know, as you reach the front tip of your tongue, you might get just a little teeny tiny little hint of lime in there, and that mixes in with the sort of grassy esters at the front tip of the palate. But yeah, dry apricot-y sort of thing, an oily kind of peary character, and yeah, just a nice, as I say, there's maybe a wee touch of like a fresh apple to this one. I'm just getting a wee bit of that there, but mainly for me, a dry apricot and a slightly sort of peary note to this beer with just a wee hint of that limey, grassy sort of thing. All things that you would expect of German noble hops, of course. But yeah, I think that rounds off everything we need to say about the flavour of this beer. Let's round off the review though with the mouthfeel. So for me, this beer is definitely top end of light bodied. The carbonation has a degree of crispness to it, but I find it very smooth, and you've got a good little bit of a kind of oily slickness to this beer too. So yeah, you've got that lovely slightly oily slickness to this one. On the hoppy side of things, I'd say that this beer is sort of, I would say that it's kind of about 15 IBUs, maybe 20 IBUs, yeah, 15, 20 IBUs at most. I don't think it's any more bitter than that. The malt base, as we said, nice and bready, a little bit of crispness in there, but it has got a good degree of sweetness and oiliness to it. And you've also got that, kind of nice oily, fruity character to it. But it's also a little bit drier at the same time, actually. So a little bit more of a dry, fruity note to it. But yeah, a lovely, lovely beer, this one. And I do think, on the basis of this, I'm looking forward to trying the other Kölsches that I have in the fridge. So keep your eyes peeled for these reviews, and I do want to go to Köln and have a look at some of these beers in the brewery restaurants. That would be awesome to film more out and about videos for you there. But yeah, let's leave it at that for this one then. This one was the Gaffel Kölsch 4.8% ABV from the Privatbrauerei Gaffel Becker in Köln, Cologne in Germany. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. Thank you for watching my beer reviews. Until the next time, please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. Let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comment section below. Let me know what your favourite Kölsch beers are, and do give me some other recommendations of ones to check out as well, because this is a style, as I say, that I do want to learn a little bit more about over the next little while. But check out my social media, check out Gaffel's social media, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Sláinte, skål, cheers, and prost.